I think most of you know him. Those of you who don't know him as well may not be aware, AV materials and software and computer kinds of activities. He has a lot of interest in religion and also in philosophical ideas and things that are related to but outside the strict field of psychiatry. And that's what he'll be talking about today, something that lies, that is relevant to psychiatry, but also to business and advertising and many other kinds of jobs that involve understanding how people think. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Sherry Chandy.
Give me one second. All right, so off the bat, I have no disclosures to make. Just a point of order, while I'm presenting, if anybody comes up with any questions, you can go to that link on the top, submit the questions. If you don't have questions, you can still go to that link and maybe upvote some question that you think we should talk about. So everyone can hear me well in the back? All right. All right. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to the Lord for all his blessings. I also want to express my gratitude towards Dr. Best for helping me prepare for this. Since the beginning of this year, we've been having grand rounds prep classes, and it's been a real help. I think that the reason it shaped out and that I'm usually one of those last to finish stuff people, but because it's been happening over the year, I'm the first person to present. So now going on to what I'm going to present today. In a nutshell, I'll first introduce the concept of behavioral nudges and illustrate them with a variety of examples. I will then talk about some fascinating studies that highlight the role of the unconscious in decision-making. Finally, I'll leave you with 6 principles of influence that you can adapt based on your personal, professional, and or even policy level needs. So this is the mandatory learning objectives slide. I'm just gonna skip it because we'll be talking a lot about this stuff. All right, so let's test one of your superpowers. Everybody here has this power. So this is the scenario. There was an election and one of the following 2 candidates won. All right. Looking only at the pictures, which of these 2 won? Left, right? All right, so they did this with a lot of people. And guess what? Most of you are thinking that this person won, and that is right. Let's go another round. Which of these 2? Looks like everybody is scared of picking the wrong answer. So that's the one that most people pick. Third time lucky? Which one of these? Most of the people pick this person. What these examples illustrate is that without being told anything substantial about the candidates, just on the basis of how they'll appear in a photograph, many of us can make a good guesstimate of who would win an election. I have an interesting next slide, the Mona Lisa. Everyone has seen her. Human beings have an innate ability to recognize faces, but they don't do that well when they look at upside down faces. So we all recognize that this example illustrates that under certain conditions, we all make repeatable errors in vision. Now, if our eyes can deceive us, can our minds also do the same? So in his best-selling book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, economics Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman categorizes our thinking processes into two: a fast thinking process called System 1 thinking, and a slow thinking process called System 2 thinking. This System 1 thinking is fast, it's instinctive, it's emotional, and it is error prone. Our System 2 thinking is slower, usually logical and analytical, and takes more effort and is more reliable. Before I get into what is a nudge, I need to explain some terms like a heuristic. Using System 1 thinking, human beings have figured out that there are ways to make fast decisions when faced with more options than can be explored. This is known as a heuristic. Heuristics help people distinguish the better option from the worst. For example, you walk into a waiting area and then you just pick a seat. There's some reason why you pick that seat, but you haven't thought up a lot of stuff like, if I sit here, this will happen, that will happen, and then what are the risks of sitting here? Nobody does that. So there is a need to have heuristics, but the problem, like the optical illusion, is that occasionally we rely on heuristics when we should be relying on rational or analytic thought. When this happens, we say humans have succumbed to cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are errors in decision-making caused by an inappropriate reliance on heuristics. Now, Wikipedia identifies 104 biases. Don't worry, I'm not going to even name all of them. I found a fun video on YouTube, which I think you may enjoy.
I'm biased because I knew it all along. I'm psychiatrist, I knew it all along. I'm biased because I put you in a category which you may or may not belong. Representativeness, bias, don't stereotype this song. I'm biased because of the small detail that grows off the big picture of the thing. Anchoring bias, see the forest full of trees. I'm biased for the first example that comes to mind. Availability, bias, the first thing that comes to mind. Oh, bias, don't let bias in your mind. Bias, don't try this, it'll influence your thinking and memories. Don't ask me, but guilty of distorted thinking. Cognitive bias, your mind becomes blinded. Decisions and problems you've been forced to solve them wrongly. I'm biased because I'll only listen to what I agree with. Confirmation bias, you know my if you are this. I'm biased because I take credit for success, but no blame for failure. Self-serving bias, my success and failure. I'm biased when I remember things the way I would expect them to be. Expectancy bias, false memories shaped by these. I'm biased because I think my opinion now was my opinion then. Self-consistency bias, but you felt different way back when. Oh, bias, don't let bias in your mind. Bias, don't try this, it'll influence your thinking and memories. Don't mess with me, guilty of distorted thinking. Cognitive bias, the memory becomes blinded. Decisions and problems been forced to solve the wrong way.
All right. Thank you. So when I was thinking about my Grand Rounds topic, I wondered if there were ways in which we could leverage cognitive biases for useful purposes. There is a saying in my native language, രോഗി ഇച്ഛിച്ചതും വൈദ്യൻ കൽപ്പിച്ചതും ഒന്ന് തന്നെ. It roughly translated, it means when what the patient desires and the physician orders are one and the same. You know, many times when you're in the office with a patient, you kind of figure out, hey, you know, this might be what the patient wants. Maybe an antibiotic is what he needs. And then the patient has come to the office thinking, hey, I need an antibiotic. And then the doctor and the patient are in sync and the family is happy and everyone's singing Kumbaya. But have you ever been in a similar situation as the person in my next slide?
It was me, I had a grandchild, be in love. I was the only one here about to have one. But it might as well buy a new ship. It would be cheaper, I think, huh? Saying no, which how should we gonna pay for all this?
I have 20,000 Republic back carries.
Public credits. The public credits are no good out here. I need something more real.
I don't have anything else but credits will do fine.
No, they won't.
Credits will do fine.
No, they won't. What, you think you're some kind of Jedi waving your hand around like that? I'm a Targaryen. My tricks don't work on me. Only money. No money, no parts, no deal.
So what happens when the doctor's recommendations and what the patient wants don't match? Deal or no deal? So let me give you and illustrate this, a certain cognitive bias that, you know, a majority of us can relate to at least. Imagine the situation, okay? I've come up to you and I tell you, hey, you know, you can have this box of your most favorite chocolates right now, or if you can wait for a week, I'll give you 2 of these boxes. What do you think you would pick? Many people say, hey, you know, Sherry, just give me the box of chocolates right now. You know, next week, I can't wait for 2 boxes. Let me just take it right now. And that's the end of that scenario. Imagine another scenario. I'm coming up to you and saying, hey, you know what? I have this awesome box of chocolates that you love. I will give it to you after 1 year. And if you can wait for another week, I can give you 2 boxes of these chocolates. Now, what would you pick? So what they found is that a lot of people say, you know, it's in the future, it's 1 year away. After I've waited for 1 year, I can wait for another week. So they pick 1 year and 1 week. So this kind of thinking that people are, you know, prone to is a type of bias which uses what is known as hyperbolic reasoning. So individuals using this type of reasoning reveal a strong tendency to make choices in the present that their future self would not have wanted them to make, even though they knew the same information that they knew today that they know in the future. And the reason I chose this was because this is a common bias that we encounter in healthcare in general. And we recommend something that will benefit the patient in the distant future. Patient agrees, hey, this is a great goal, I'll try and do this, but never reaches that goal because they have to go through some suffering in the here and now, in the present, while the reward is in the future. Making the suggested change is really hard. So this is Just a quick tip. I don't want to go too much into hyperbolic reasoning because there's a lot to go there, but the solution to hyperbolic reasoning is what we call reward substitution. You give them a substitute reward in the present for keeping them motivated towards their goal in the future. All right. So let's talk about change. Change is something that you can effect in many ways. One of them is by forcing people to do things, punishing them, rewarding them. Lots of ways that you can make people change. The particular type of change that I'm talking about is based off of something known as nudge theory. Nudging is not something new or cutting edge technique that just came out. In fact, I'm pretty sure everyone in this room has been nudged sometime in their life. If you have used a GPS device to tell you which way to go, then you have been nudged, because the GPS device says, turn left. If you want, you can turn left. If you don't, you go straight and then you take the next left. And then the machine just readjusts to your new route. So this basic approach is based off of the philosophy of libertarian paternalism. The behavioral nudge is a technique to change people's behavior and alter their decisions more effectively without taking away their choices. It incorporates a behavior change framework that is explained using the acronym EAST. EAST stands for something that is easy, something that is attractive, something that is social, and something that is timely. So if you can come up with a way to present the recommendation that you have in an EAST format or EAST framework, that could be a behavioral nudge that has a good chance of working based on the data available. Put it another way, as a physician, I'm providing, sometimes myself or my patient or even my community the opportunity to choose, while at the same time highlighting evidence-based choices that are easy, attractive, social, and timely to nudge them towards healthy choices. Let's look at how they used this to save or prevent people from wasting electricity. So once upon a time, they used to send you an electric bill which said, okay, so you use this much electricity, you need to pay this much money, and this is the date that you need to pay it by. So some people thought, can we use nudge over here? And what they did was they collected some data on the electricity usage, and they showed people in their electricity bill, this is how much you're using, this is how much your neighbors are using, and this is how much your efficient neighbors are using. And what they found was that people who looked at this bill started reducing their electricity usage because they wanted to be like their efficient neighbors. And unfortunately, there were some people who were already efficient. When they saw this bill, they decided, I'm not using enough electricity like everybody else. I got to use some more. And they started using a little more. So back to the drawing board they went, and then they came up with the version 2.0. In this nudge, what they did was they showed them smiley faces. We all love smiley faces. So what they did was they presented the same information. You're doing great. You're saving a lot of electricity. And then they showed the people who are doing well, they gave them 2 smiley faces. And if they just were all right, they gave them 1 smiley face. And for the electricity wasters, none. So this was an actual study that worked, and it saved millions of dollars, both for the nation and for the family. Let's go on to some of the nudging that we see in healthcare. This is a very famous example. A bunch of countries in Europe, kind of similar racial background, ethnically, in terms of socioeconomic status, a lot of similarities. But what they noticed was these countries, Austria, Belgium, blah, 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 all of those countries were very organ friendly. And countries like Denmark, Netherlands, UK, and Germany were very organ stingy. So they did this study. It's called Do Default Save Lives. And they found out that the reason this skew in organ donation was happening was because of a small change that occurred in the driving license form. Most of the people, just like you and me, go to the driving license place, see this form, saying, check the box if you want to participate in organ donation. Nobody wants to check a box. I'm here for my license. So they don't check the box and they don't donate their organs. But when you look at the forms that those other countries, the ones that were very organ friendly, had, this is the kind of form that they had. Their form said, check the box below if you don't want to participate in the organ donor program. And you know, most people, they don't want to check a box and they automatically enroll in the organ donation program. So what I'm trying to show is that there are ways in which, and you know, if you actually poll a majority of the Americans, if you ask them, do you think organ donation is a good thing? Around 90% of the people would say, yeah, that's great. I'd really donate organs. But if you look at their behavior when the opportunity to donate organs or their opportunity comes, they don't want to check a box and they don't enroll in the program. So far, what I've explained is that human beings make fast decisions. Sometimes cognitive biases influence some of these decisions. The research from behavioral science has shown that in addition to logic, which is the information bit that we present to the patients, in addition to that, humans are influenced by their emotions, their social interactions, and their environment. So if we as clinicians can leverage any of these, we can nudge healthcare decisions. Let's take the example of healthy eating, for example. The entire thing is something called choice architecture, but the specific healthy eating nudges that they've come up with is using default choice, just like in the organ donation. What the data shows is that human beings, when they are in a cafeteria scenario, they tend to pick food items that are at eye level. So what they did in cafeterias was when kids were, to promote kids to eat healthy foods, they placed all the healthy foods in the eye level, and they noticed that, most of the kids just ended up picking healthy foods in those cases. And in areas where they were given the trays and the food was laid out, what they told them was give them the healthy fruit option as the default. But if they want to exchange, they can ask for an exchange and they can still get what they want. But that's one way in which they changed the default. The other thing that they did was information nudge. Now, everybody has seen, you go to McDonald's or something. I go to McDonald's a lot. So I see all those calorie information there, and, that really doesn't change my mind. I've gone there to buy a quarter pounder with cheese, and I'm going to buy that. So if the information was presented to me in a way like, if you eat this food item, you got to spend 30 minutes on the treadmill to burn it off, then I might actually think again before I, make that choice. But then again, I can if I want to, but maybe not. Another way that you can encourage healthy eating is what we do in the outpatient for people. We give them, thinking tools, asking people to slow down, writing down their goals, encouraging tracking data, commitment contracts. All of these work. But the last bit is using a little more of our system 2 thinking rather than our system 1 thinking. Let's move on to some nudges in our daily lives. This is a fun activity. I want you guys to think of the last 2 digits of your social security number. Just say it in your mind, all right? And now, my question to you is, how much would you pay for a good bottle of wine, all right? What they have found is that Dan Ariely and his colleagues found that people whose social security numbers were from like 80 to 99, those people ended up paying 3 to 4 times more than people in the rest of the group for the same bottle of wine. For example, if somebody went into a store to just pick up a bottle of wine for $8 and they were anchored to a higher number, they'd end up buying something for maybe $27. And this is the basis of something we have all seen. Everybody who's ever walked into a store and seen the sales, and they show, hey, discount today only for $40 marked down to 20. So basically what they're doing is they're anchoring that number into your mind, and then you think, hey, I'm getting such a great deal, and I got some extra cash. Let me go and pick this thing up. So coming to something in healthcare where they use this was, they did this interesting study. Basically, they split a group of 100 people with psoriasis into 2 groups, a control group and an intervention group. To the control group, they said, hey, here's a once monthly injection. Do you want it? And then they were given a rating scale and asked to rate it from 0 to 10. 0 where I don't want it, and 10 where absolutely must have it. And what they found was the control group, their average was around 2. They said like, maybe, maybe not. But the group that was given the question, hey, you know what? There's a daily injection for psoriasis, and there's also a monthly injection. How interested are you in the monthly injection? Just rate it on the scale for me. And what they found was most of the people, the median answer was 7.5. So, quite a big difference in the way that people change their mind about an injectable for once monthly injectable. Maybe this might work in psychiatry too, who knows? Let me also talk a little bit about some other types of nudges in healthcare. For example, something that recently is in the news about vaccinations. So they did the study in around 30 North Carolina pediatric and family medicine clinics. And what they found was that they split the doctors into 3 groups. One was a control group. They told them just do your usual spiel. The second group, they said, you talk in length with the patients about, they told them, talk about the side effects, benefits, safety, effectiveness, all of that of the vaccines. And the third group, they told them to make brief, assertive statements as if the parents were already ready to vaccinate their kids. And the statement they said was, now that Michael is 12, there are 3 vaccines we give to kids his age. Today, he'll get meningitis, HPV, and Tdap. And guess what? They noticed that there was a 5% increase in vaccination rates across the board. Now, 5% might not be a big number, but in terms of vaccinations, the CDC data shows that this effort alone could save indirect costs almost how much? $295 billion. And in indirect costs, $1.3 trillion. So there's, quite a bit of money that can be saved there. This is another reminder nudge that they've recently started using, where they notice that once patients leave the doctor's office, they're on their own with the hard work of, following the recommendations or the treatment plan, whatever was arrived at. So what they found was that 50% of the people, couldn't follow the plan that was made and they agreed to in the office. And this is compounded by, the problems like lower income, high risk populations with lower health IQs. So what they did was, just like they send you reminders, hey, this so-and-so time is your appointment, they started sending them small reminders about the plan that they had arrived at with the doctor. It's not extra work for the doctor. If it's like an electronic system, it just pulls those recommendations and sends it to the patient. So the patient kind of feels supported in between this doctor's visits. And, it's proven to, improve patient engagement, which is a very important word in healthcare nowadays. This is a very interesting study that was done, a phone call reminder nudge example, a randomized control study involving 735,000 patients who were enrolled in a Medicare Part D program. Just before their medications ran out, or in case they were late in refilling them, they got a call from the pharmacy telling them, hey, you know what? Looks like you haven't refilled your medications. What's going on? So people started, refilling their medications, and what they found was that this reduced the risk of hospitalization and other healthcare costs. Very interesting study about reminders for no-shows at hospitals. In the National Health Service in the UK, they started sending out a small text telling people, hey, you know what? This so-and-so date is your appointment, but please make it to your appointment or we lose 160 pounds. Guess what? No-show rates dropped by 25%. They also did a slight variation on the same thing, where they added another influencing factor, which is they just added the person's name. And guess what? That 25 went down to something in between 25 and 30%. So don't just tell them when's the date and time. Tell them, they have something to lose. That's a bias of loss aversion. All right. JAM study. I love JAM, so I just wanted to put that picture up. But there's this shopping place, and they set up two counters. One counter had 23 varieties of jam, and the other counter had 6 varieties of jam. Can anyone say where most of the crowd went to? 23. Very good. Yes. So 23 is where everybody went. But when you're looking at the bottom line, what they found was that most of the people, most of the jam was sold from the place that they had only 6 varieties of jam. So, little bit of backstory about back in the day when I was in 9th grade. After school, I used to go to my dad's shop, and my dad's an optometrist, and he's a self-taught salesman. So I noticed my dad would never show anybody more than 4 or 5 frames when he's showing them the glasses. And I asked him, what's the deal with that? And he told me, while talking to them, I just figure out how much, they want to spend. And depending on how much they want to spend, there's a variety of frames that will fit them. And I decide on what's the one that suits them, and I just show them those, and those are the ones that they usually pick. Apparently this is a thing taught in business schools nowadays, but it adds to this other nudge called choice pruning. What they did the study on electronic health records in hospitals, and what they found was that it's quite elaborate, but what they found was that when the consultation team gave them really good recommendations, but around 10 or more, it turns out that the primary team most of the time didn't use those recommendations, and they never even ended up anywhere on the discharge summary. But when the primary team or when the consult team gave them like 4 or around about 4 recommendations, what they saw was that the primary team actually implemented all of those 4 recommendations, and they even copy and pasted it into the discharge summary. So it was like better care. Something to be said about the nudge of choice pruning. Smoking is another interesting thing that we all want to engage people with. What do? We give them more information. We give them all of the choices. Then they come back with little or no progress. What do? Rinse and repeat. In our mind, if it works, hey, I'm a great doctor. If it doesn't work, hey, that patient or bad patient. So, they did the study. This is again, I think, done in somewhere in Europe. Looks like French, but could be wrong. So they did the study where they looked at the persuasive effects of warning labels on cigarette boxes, and what they found was that it suggested, at least among the younger, highly educated smoker, it seems to be more effective to communicate short-term benefits associated with quitting smoking. Like if you look at the bottom right corner, you'll see the tag which says, if you quit smoking, your stamina will improve. Those kind of messages actually engaged and caused people to actually quit smoking, compared to a tag that says, oh, smoking causes cancer, or you'll save a lot of money. Those kind of messages about stuff in the future, nobody wants to hear that. They want something right here, right now. All right. This is one of a very interesting studies that I think is fascinating. And we've all done this. Antibiotics. We have a 10-day course, and we take the first 3 or 4 days, and then we're like, I'm feeling much better. I don't really need to take this. I'm super man, woman, whatever. But what this company did was they took their medications, the same medication, they put different colors on the same medication, so green, blue, and yellow, for example. And then they gave it out to people. And what they found was that people actually thought, after eating, half or maybe like 1/3 of the pills, they felt better, but they still didn't stop, because there's something going on in their mind saying that, oh, I ate these colors, so now I should eat the others, or they'll feel bad. So something was going on. People started taking the whole course. All right. The other thing, suicide prevention nudge. So what happened in September 1998 in Britain, they changed the law, and they said that if you're going to sell more than 16 paracetamol, that's the Tylenol pills, you got to put them in blister packets. And what they found was that people who were trying to commit suicide had a difficult time pressing each pill out of the blister. That was just enough time for them to rethink this idea of, do I really want to do this? As opposed to you having a whole bottle of pills that you just chug down. Much easier. And this actually worked over the next 11 years or so. There was a decline of 43% in the overdoses, and a 61% reduction in the liver transplants. So another nudge. All right, so enough of the nudges already. Let's talk about some fun stuff about the unconscious and the neurobiological basis for that. Human beings can be unconsciously influenced. The next bunch of, like, a few slides will talk about this, but if you don't take away anything from the next few slides, just remember that many decisions that we make are heavily influenced by unconscious processes that we may not be fully able to comprehend most of the time. Now, let's imagine that you've eaten a piece of food. You're at some picnic and there's some food that you got, put it in your mouth, and then you've chewed it and you're tasting it, and then you realize this food is rotten and it's disgusting, and you spit it out. The part of your brain that lights up is the insular cortex that deals with gustatory processing. Guess what? As humans were developing, first they had this, disgusting food that they ate, and, a certain portion of their brain lit up. Guess what else? As they developed some more, they started thinking about abstract stuff and about morals and stuff that is morally, disgusting. And guess what? The brain decided, you know what? I got this area where I, work on taste disgust. I'll just put this moral disgust also in the same place. And that's why when we think of some really morally disgusting behavior, or we see a picture of some morally disgusting act, the term we use is, it's like so disgusting, I feel like I want to puke, or this image makes me want to puke. It's because disgust is associated morally with our physical, centers that promote gustatory disgust. Another study that was done, so they got a bunch of people and they told them, hey, you know what, why don't you tell us a little bit about your high school, a neutral topic, something like talk to us about the weather. And after they talked a bit about it, they said, okay, so the test is over, we don't have any money to give you, but we have these fountain pens and we have these hand wipes, so what do you want? And they found that people chose it 50-50, so like around 50-50 split. Then they took a group of people and they told them, this time they told them to talk about some moral failure that they had in the past and talk about it. And after they talked about it, they said, okay, experiment's over. What would you want, the fountain pen or the hand wipes? And guess what? Most of the people now wanted the hand wipes because they wanted to cleanse themselves of this moral failing. There are other variations of this similar experiment, but I'm just going to move on to the last one in this section, which is an elevator study. So they told this a person who's volunteered for the experiment that there's somebody who wants to interview you, and that person's office is up on the top floor. So you got to go through this elevator. And in the elevator, they put the person who was going to interview them and the person who had volunteered, and the person who was going to interview them had a whole bunch of paper stacks, and they were also had a cup of coffee in their hand. So while they were in the elevator, the person who was going to interview them told, can you please do me a favor and hold this coffee for me? And half of those people were given a hot cup of coffee, and half of those people, the other people, were given a cold iced coffee. Now they went up, did the interview, and then after the interview, they were asked to rate how warm and friendly did you feel about the tester. So what they found was that those who held the hot coffee rated the interviewer as warm, and those who held the cold coffee rated them lower in warmth. So it's something the brain is doing that's confusing its temperature reception with the way that they are feeling. It is, to put it another way, a concrete way of solving an abstract or a literal way of, it's confusing the literal with the abstract. Bless you. So finally, this is the takeaway message from this section, is that essentially what we do with our unconscious decision making is justify the intuitions in the visceral responses we already had. In other ways, many of our decisions are heavily influenced by the unconscious processes that we may not be able to fully comprehend most of the time. All right. Finally, coming to our last section, I'll end with the principles of influence that you can adapt based on your personal, professional, or even policy level needs. Now, there are 6 principles of influence. If you include one or more of these principles into a communication, you significantly increase the likelihood that people will say yes to what you're trying to communicate. I'm not going to go into all of the studies on which these principles are based, but basically the principles are reciprocity, liking, authority, scarcity, commitment, and social proof. When it comes to reciprocity, the principle of reciprocity works because humans are social beings, and there's an obligation to give when you receive. So the key is to be the first one to give, and then whatever you give also needs to be personalized, and it needs to be unexpected or, unusual in some way. The principle of scarcity works because, to simply put, people want more of what they can't have. When you use this principle, what you need to highlight is discuss the benefits that they'll gain if they choose your recommendations, point out what is unique about your recommendations, and also remind them on what they stand to lose if they fail to consider your proposal. The principle of authority works because people will follow credible, knowledgeable experts. All right, we all know the impact of using symbols of authority in our offices. Putting up medical degrees is one way in which this is communicated. An often overlooked way of improving one's authority is getting a good introduction. What researchers have found is that as long as someone, even if that somebody works for you, introduces you to people as an expert in your field, your recommendations then are very credible. Commitment. Oh, this is a fun topic. How do we get people to commit? So you do this by actively looking for and asking for small initial commitments. So they did this interesting study. They took two neighborhoods that was kind of similar, and in one neighborhood, they went there and went door to door and told them, can you please put this small postcard size thing in your window to promote safe driving in this neighborhood? And a lot of people, yeah, it's a small card, they didn't care, they put it in their windowsill. And then 10 days later, people went to both these neighborhoods and told them, you know what, we're trying to make this neighborhood safe. Here's a big yard sign which promotes safe driving. So can we put this in your lawn or front yard? And guess what? The people who had initially agreed to put that small card in their windowsill, there was a difference of 400% in people who agreed to put that big, maybe even ugly yard sign in their front lawn. So basically, the idea is if you want commitment from somebody, you need to ask them for something small initially. It needs to be voluntary. It needs to be an active, something that they need to do. And it needs to be something that is public or that is known to others. Interesting experiment they did about no-show rates again. In the office, before letting the patient out, they usually give them, hey, this is your next appointment, come. But what they did was, instead of the doctor or somebody in the office writing it, they gave the patient a pen and told the patient to write, this is the date of the appointment and this is the time. Or if there was a phone, they put a reminder in their phone. They asked them to enter it right there with the doctor. And guess what? They found that people who did that, there was a 18% decrease in no-show rates from just that one small nudge. Liking. This is the I think era of Facebook. So there's a lot of liking stuff. So how do you get somebody to like you? What the data shows is that people like other people who are similar to them. People like other people who give them compliments, and people like other people who cooperate with them towards a mutual goal. So if you can use any of these, you can get people to like you and in the process follow things or recommendations that you have. And social proof, my most favorite, is the most powerful of the influence principles. When people are uncertain about what to do, what they do is they look around and they look at other people who are having the same problem, and they kind of do what others are doing. And what they found is that this usually happens in unfamiliar situations, when they find many people are doing the same thing and when the people are similar to them. Now, I have a 5-minute video which is going to incorporate some of the material that I talked about today. Take a look to see if you can identify some of the things that I talked about, and then we can go on to the Q&A part of our presentation.
To find out, we've designed a unique experiment in Las Vegas. We're setting up a sign and hiding our cameras. We're going to see if we can get people to wait in line for no reason at all. Think it'll work? After 15 minutes, nobody got in line. Seems like people would rather follow a trend than set one. So we asked the conspirators to help us prime the pump a little by starting a line. Would the sight of just one person be enough to get you to join? What do you think other people will do? Will anyone actually get in line?
No, I just told to come in line, so I'm not sure yet.
Oh no, she didn't take the bait. As the minutes tick by, people are curious, but cautious. It looks like no one is going to join the line.
What's up, man?
How about these two?
I don't know what it's for. I think it could be something good, but yeah, I just saw something. Yeah, come on, you'll be second, third people. Good luck.
Will they join the line even though they have no idea what they'd be waiting for? They're in. We've got them. And now that these two join the line, the floodgates are open. People just can't resist joining in.
What is it? Looks like it could be something fun. Is it free?
And the longer the line got, the more others wanted to join. Remember, these people have no idea what they're waiting for. All it took was one person. Now we've got a crowd of random strangers.
This phenomenon is known as informational social influence. It occurs when you rely on others to determine your course of action. You're much more likely to use social influence when the situation is ambiguous, such as in a crisis, or when you're uncertain about what to do.
As you can see, even without a clear reason for waiting, our line grew and grew and grew. It's time to get this show on the road. Where to exactly?
It's not over. It's not over.
We wanted to see if people would follow along, even though they had no idea where they were going. We're going to test the science and follow the leader with 3 unexpected obstacles. First, a dizzy maze. And even though the path makes no sense, no one is getting out of the line. Do you think these people will realize they're going nowhere fast? Looks like they're in it for good. Now for the next step, we put tape on the ground to see if people will jump over it just because they saw someone else do it. Think they will? Wow, a spinning jump. 3 points per side. Finally, we set up a hopscotch game and had our winner.
Yeah.
People follow suit. Would you? All of these adults are playing this kids game because their brains want to follow the leader. So getting each of them to take a leg from an Elvis impersonator is a no-brainer. Now, for the final part of our Pied Piper experiment, do you think we can get them to dance in a conga line? By now you probably know the answer. Absolutely yes. Remember, all this started with just one man waiting in line for nothing. 5 minutes ago, all these strangers were going about their business, and now they're all dancing together. Well, it might seem strange, it's actually what scientists would expect.
We often use other people as a shortcut. We look to their behavior to figure out what the best thing is. Because if they're doing it, it's probably pretty good for us.
Just followed along, started dancing, joined in, and it's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Remember, these people are happy to do all of these ridiculous things for no other reason than because the person in front of them is also doing it.
I was just doing it because everybody else was doing it. When you're young, you're taught to follow the leader. So after the game, you're like, follow the leader.
Like, what happened? Here's my friend. Here's my friend. Stop controlling me.
Now, we could tell these people they were part of an experiment, about why their brain chose to follow the leader. But this is Vegas. Why ruin all the fun?
All right. So with that, I'm ending my presentation today. Thank you so much. It looks like we have a question. So the question that I got online was, I'm going to go with online first. What is your favorite or most effective nudge you use with patients and with friends? So I came across this study about the no-show rates early in July. So my favorite nudge that I used with my patients was actually giving them this piece of paper. There's a card in Belmont, there's a visiting card, and the other back of that card, there's an area to write your next appointment date. So I started giving this out to all my new patients that I'm seeing for the first time, and they're like all, sizing me up to see what's this guy about, what's his deal, should I come back to see him? And I actually think it worked in my case. I have the numbers from Belmont that show that I have been having pretty low no-show rates since August of 2018. So that's my favorite one that I used. And the other one with friends, I don't know. What I've noticed with friends, I don't. There is this other nudge that I have thought about, and I'm actually used it on myself. And the nudge is, it's for weight loss. As you all know, that I want to lose some weight. And so what I did was that I started tracking all of my food, and I started thinking that, 2 months from now, if so-and-so weight doesn't arrive, I'm going to donate a certain amount of money to a cause that I don't really like at all. So the idea there is that I'd rather lose weight than give money to a cause that I don't want. So that's a nudge that I've used. I've actually lost 6 pounds in the last 2 months. So I'm pretty much on target. So other questions?
Third question. Is there a certain type of brain that is more nudgeable? Or let's take weight loss as an example. And you find 5 different nudges. All works with 20% of the population each nudge. Add them all up, does it cover the 100%? Or is it the same 20% of the population that you can nudge over and over again?
So I would say that human beings, being the social beings that they are, a majority of them could be nudged. It is the type of, or maybe personality type, that doesn't want friends. I don't want to live next to anybody, nobody come to my house. Those kind of people are more difficult to nudge. And the more social and engaging you are, the better it is to nudge you. So in the population, that type of personality, which is someone who doesn't want to engage, doesn't find meaning in friendships, kind of what they earlier referred to as sociopaths, they would be more difficult to nudge. Any other questions? Sure.
Maybe, I think this is less a question and more a comment. First of all, thank you for a terrific presentation. I particularly like your use of the video. That last one was just charming.
Thank you.
I've seen something similar. That particular video has a version that focuses on developing a change initiative within an organization.
Mm-hmm.
You need a first person to stand up. Just as valuable, though, is that number 2 person. If you recall in the video, by himself, not much was happening until that next person. And as soon as the next person comes along, suddenly the line starts to fill. And so this has been a repeated sort of evidence. So if you want to develop a change initiative, find at least one other person who wants to join you, and your chances of success are substantially higher than doing it by yourself. How many here are familiar with Kahneman's book? A few. Okay. I was reintroduced to this stuff. I first learned about Kahneman when I was in medical school, shortly after he published his first paper with Daniel Tversky. And then was reintroduced to this some decade or so ago, and then his book comes out. And I have been totally taken in by this notion that, though you refer to them as nudges, that the majority of our decision-making, of course, is taking place unconsciously. And I know Dr. Best and I have had this conversation a bit, you know, how do you understand what being conscious is about? But it takes place unconsciously. And that one way of describing how that works is through heuristics and the biases they create. So the notion of the bias is that your heuristic doesn't just cause some error, but it consistently causes the same kind of error. So you anchoring always pulls people towards the anchor.
Yeah.
It's not just something different, it's just always towards. So if you give an anchor, you can expect people to make their judgments that are more in line with the anchor then. And so if you move the anchor around, people will get their decision making. This actually shows up so commonly that I have wanted, so this is an invitation to many of you here, I have wanted to explore more deeply just how these heuristics influence the way we diagnose, recommend treatment, understand response, create change initiatives. Because obviously we're helping patients change from what they're doing to something else. Maybe it's adhere better or take a medication more dependably, or assessment and how that may change. Anyway, I think it's profoundly interesting. Lots, as you mentioned, lots of applications.
Right.
And I would look forward to, I guess I need one other person. I look forward to partnering with everybody who'd be interested in exploring this. And
Are you interested in people that are not just patients?
not just patients.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm interested in pretty much everybody. Not just faculty or residents. Preferably with some, if we're going to do psychiatry, at least some familiarity with psychiatry makes it a bit easier. The applications are, I think, ubiquitous.
We should stop now.
All right. Oh, there's one
Oh,
more.
one more question.
Yeah.
I would like to ask a question.
Sure.
I was wondering if measures or any type of evidence has been collected very people, for example, because we were talking about nudges, unconscious decision making. Okay, so if we think of population of people that are highly educated, for example, they have developed a lot of rationality for decision making, or also have developed strong will, right? They, I don't know, very disciplined. Let's say people have been, or military people have been practiced a lot of discipline, or well, highly educated people who has higher education. Have we noticed, for example, if they are less inclined to be less susceptible to nudging or to, strategies to induce them to make unconscious decisions?
Yeah.
That's my question.
So this is a very good question. The question is that are people who are more aware of the cognitive biases and more educated, able to resist nudges. And the short answer is no. They are just as susceptible, given, like in one of my earlier slides, it's not just logic that makes people make decisions. It depends on their environment, their emotions, their what else? The other thing is their social situation, and there's all of these things play a role, and people are not able to be nudged. I mean, not able to resist nudges if they are in that particular situation. I mean, it's kind of like temptation. Can you tempt somebody with a chocolate? You all must have heard of that marshmallow experiment, which is now it's not really reproducible, but the issue is about temptation. So under the right conditions, you can nudge people, and that's why there are various applications for this. Even just like any sword, it has a good and more dangerous applications for nudges. And
a good example of that, like I'm as everyone knows, a very healthy person, but when I was a first year resident and exhausted, every day I would go down and get crumb cake from the cafeteria. Like I was tired, I was stressed. So I was very susceptible to the nudge of that delicious crumb cake.
So
I think a lot depends on the motivation and what's happening. So it's true that a lot just overlaps with hypnosis and suggestibility. And it is true that there are some individuals that are more hypnotizable and others that are less hypnotizable. But it really matters on the motivation. So on a burn unit, when people are in a lot of pain and they're being offered hypnosis and pain medicine, they're very highly motivated and they're all hypnotizable or virtually all hypnotizable. So it really depends on the circumstances and what the motivations are in the nudge situation. We should wrap up now because it's getting late. But thank you very much for.
Thank you.
Nice job. Very
Thank
nice.
you.
Well done.